Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. Last year I decided to go out on my own to camp for a single night. I wasn't planning anything special. No big hike, no multi-day route, no Instagram-worthy summit. I just wanted to sit under some trees, make a small fire, sleep once in a tent that hadn't been out of its bag in months, then go home. I wouldn't call myself experienced, but I wasn't clueless either. I figured one night was a safe bet. Get there in the afternoon, set up before dark, relax, and leave early the next day. Simple. When I pulled up to the first trail I had in mind, 3 cars were parked nose to nose along the gravel shoulder. That was enough to sour my mood. I hadn't gone there to wave at strangers or make small talk over water filters. I just wanted quiet, so I kept driving. A mile down the road, I saw another thin cut between the trees and a weathered signpost that didn't have a sign anymore. Just 2 nail holes and a pale rectangle where a board used to be. There wasn't any parking, not really, just crunchy leaves pressed flat by old tires. I drove farther until the ditch flattened out enough that I could ease my car off without it tilting. I killed the engine and sat for a second, listening to the tick of hot metal cooling, the way a car breathes after a drive. The new trail wasn't much. Just dirt. No gravel, no wooden steps, no useful blazes. It ran straight at first, then wove between saplings that have to bend when older trees push them around. The day was light gray, one big sheet of cloud. The air smelled like damp bark even though it hadn't rained. I walked for about 2 hours, some combination of boredom and contentment settling in that you only get when there isn't much to look at. Just trees. Just the same shade of green. My boots pushed patterns into the dust, and I followed those like they meant something. The path got thinner gradually, like a rope fraying. At first the edges feathered out, then the dirt lightened where leaves had reclaimed it. After a while I noticed I was stepping over ferns, then through them, and I had that small cold thought you get when you realize you haven't seen a marker in a long time. I slowed down and looked behind me. The way back didn't look like a way back. It looked like every other direction, brown and green and nothing else. I had half expected this at the beginning. I told myself if the trail got faint I'd turn around before it got stupid. But 2 hours in, turning back felt like giving up. I don't know why the mind does that math. 2 hours forward feels easier than 2 hours back, even when they are literally the same. So I kept going for another 10 minutes, scanning for anything that said path, boot prints, a scuffed root, a cut branch. Nothing. When I finally turned around and started retracing, I wasn't panicked. Not yet. I picked landmarks like a beginner. A snag that looked like a bent finger, a stump shaped like a seat, a birch with a scar swirling around its trunk. The forest had the same quiet it always has in the middle of the day, which is to say it was never actually quiet. Leaves hissed when the breeze moved through them. A distant woodpecker hit the same tree for an hour like a metronome with the volume turned low. Every once in a while a twig snapped under my boot and made more sound than it should have. I was 5 minutes into the return when I stopped dead. A cabin sat in the trees that weren't supposed to have cabins. It didn't hide itself. No brush pushed against its walls, no vines swallowed its roof. It was just there, in plain view, like it had been dropped in by a helicopter and forgotten. The roof sagged a little in the middle. The front had a single rectangular doorway with no door. The wood was sun-bleached where the eaves protected it and darker where rain had streaked it. I hadn't passed it on the way in. I was sure of that. You don't miss a building in the woods and then suddenly find it. The first thing I thought was I must be more lost than I realized. The second thing I thought was nothing helpful, just that wordless prickle of wrong you feel sometimes. I stood there too long. My brain turned over harmless explanations. Old hunting cabin, ranger station that nobody uses, some private land cut into public by a mistake on a map, but none of those settled the feeling. It looked occupied, and not in a tidy weekend project way. I approached, slow because I wanted to, and slow because the ground was lumpy with roots and I didn't want to trip and give away how nervous I was, even to myself. No glass, no windows at all. Just slits with boards nailed across them where windows could have been. Inside, the air smelled old, like mouse nests and wet cardboard. Garbage slumped against one wall, crushed cans, a boot without laces, a blanket that might have been white once. The floor had a gray stain in one corner that wasn't fresh enough to be something I didn't want to think about. A coil of wire lay under a rickety chair. It felt like a stage after the play closed, props left where actors dropped them. I told myself I'd look for 1 minute and go. That was my plan. 1 minute carries a lot of weight when you're trying to make a rule feel like courage. What made me leave wasn't something obvious. It was a detail so small that it weighed more than it should have. On the back wall, just above a sliver of light coming through a gap in the boards, someone had scratched lines, 5 and then a slash through them, and again and again. Tally marks. Not neat. They climbed the wall in uneven stacks as high as a person could reach. Maybe days, maybe years, maybe nothing. But the sight of them did what all the other clues hadn't. It turned the feeling in my stomach sharp. I turned and stepped out, the way you leave a room at a funeral, quiet, careful, trying not to bump anything. I decided to find the original path first and think about what I'd seen later. I'd taken 10 steps toward the trees when a loud thump hit the wall behind me. Not a twig, not a squirrel. It was the flat, heavy sound of a human shoulder or a hand against wood. I spun. Through the doorway, a man slid into view from behind the interior wall, like he'd been pressed against it and finally decided to unstick. He was maybe mid-40s, maybe older. Age hard to tell because his face had the kind of dirt ground in that changes everything. His clothes looked like clothes you sleep in more than clothes you wear, torn at the cuffs, knees shiny with grime. He stood with his head slightly forward, eyes level, not startled, not angry. If I had to pick one word for his expression, it would be blank. But it was a kind of blank that made me feel like he wasn't. Sorry, I said, because that word is what comes out of me when my brain doesn't know what else to supply. Didn't mean to. He didn't answer. He just watched me, and in that watchfulness I learned more than if he'd spoken. I wasn't supposed to be there. He had decided that. Whether I belonged or not didn't matter. He had already placed me somewhere in his mind, and the category wasn't neighbor. I backed away without turning around. That felt important. I didn't want to give him my back. When I'd gotten far enough that branches blocked the doorway, I turned and walked, not fast, just steady, as if I weren't leaving him but leaving the idea of him. Once I couldn't see the cabin anymore, I sped up. Every few steps I checked the shadows between trunks, looking for movement that matched a person. Nothing. 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 The forest at that hour, 5 or so in the afternoon, flattens into shapes that all look like each other. You start thinking a black knot in a tree is an eye, then it isn't. An hour later I found the path again, not through skill but luck. A worn patch cut across a slope, plain, obvious, like a sentence you'd somehow skipped while reading and then landed on accidentally when you blinked. I didn't think about going back to the car. The light was thinning, and I didn't trust myself not to miss a turn and end up deeper in by the time the sky went down to nothing. I decided to camp, set up quickly, stay put, leave at first light. It felt like a compromise with my own fear. Not brave, not foolish, just practical. I chose a spot just off the visible trail, close enough that I could see it, but not so close that someone walking could see me at a glance. I worked faster than I ever have with tent poles, the corners snapping together in muscle memory. I staked the fly, threw my bag inside, and crawled in after it. I had planned to start a fire, heat something up, maybe write notes in my phone. Miles walked, birds seen, those harmless accounting details that make a small day feel organized. But my hands were shaking now that I'd stopped moving, and the thought of doing anything that kept me outside longer than necessary felt stupid. I lay down and stared at the zipper. It's funny what part of a tent becomes important when you think about danger. Not the fabric, not the poles. Just the zipper. That thin metal track and its little tab. I closed my eyes and listened to the forest creak. Trees make sounds when you're still enough to hear them. Bark warms and cools. Limbs rub. Somewhere an owl woke up, made a sound like it had a sore throat, and then decided it didn't. I drifted towards sleep, that heavy slide where your mind gives up trying to watch itself. The next time my eyes opened, it was a darkness that felt physical, like I could have touched it with my hand and brought it inside on my fingers. I didn't know what had woken me. No big noise. No flash. Just that electric sense that something is not the same as it was when you closed your eyes. I looked at the tent door. The entryway sat half unzipped because I'd been careless, or because I wanted air, I don't know which. And in the opening, where black turns to darker black, there was a face. Or rather the idea of a face, the pale oval the night can't fully swallow. A head, bent a little to fit, watching me. I don't remember a sound coming out of me, but I must have made one. I jerked back so hard the sleeping bag tangled my legs. The head flinched the same way and vanished, and I heard feet scrape the dead leaves just outside, fast, not delicate, and then the sound stretched away into the trees. My first thought after the blank surprise was the stupidest. Zip the door. I lunged and pulled the tab until the teeth whispered shut. as if that ever stopped anyone who wanted in. Then I grabbed for my flashlight and fired it on. The beam punched a pale cone into the nylon and made the tent glow like a lantern. I hated that. Anyone outside could see the shape of my body in the light. I turned it off, then on again because not seeing felt worse. I did that 3 times before I settled on leaving it on and tilting it toward the floor so it made a smaller halo. I waited a minute, then another. The forest was back to its ordinary whisper. If the man from the cabin had run, he had either kept going or stopped where I couldn't hear him. I pictured him crouched behind a tree, patient. That picture wasn't helpful. Eventually I unzipped just enough to push the light outside and sweep it. The beam hit tall grass, a stump, a shimmer of moths. No motion. I slid out, stood up, and pushed the light as far as it would go into the trees. Still nothing. If someone had been close, he was gone now. My heart thudded high in my chest like it had climbed up there to get a better view. I packed in a blur. You don't realize how many things you have until you try to undo them all at once. Stakes, poles, stuffed sacks that never take what they released. I shoved everything in my pack without folding, without care. I kept sweeping the light in half circles and listening for a footstep that didn't belong to me. Every sound that wasn't mine felt important. A chipmunk can sound like a person when you want it to. When I set off, I didn't run. That felt like a good way to lose the trail. I walked the fastest walk my legs will do, and still be called walking. The path in my beam looked like a pale fan unfurling. Every so often I looked over my shoulder and found only the tunnel of light behind me, empty. It took longer than I wanted to get back to the car, longer than it had taken to go in. That's how dark works. It stretches distances, adds time. At the road, my car looked absurdly normal. It sat where I left it, slightly crooked, the windshield filmed with a thin scratch of pollen. I unlocked it and got in and locked it again, and I sat with my hands on the wheel for a full minute before I turned the key. I didn't start the engine because I was afraid of waking anything, like noise might announce that I had survived when something preferred I hadn't. On the drive home, the trees along the two-lane flickered by so close they felt like they were leaning in to look. I kept the radio off. The quiet in a car at night is different from the quiet outside. It feels sealed, as if you're underwater and sound travels wrong. I kept seeing the face at the tent opening each time I blinked. The shape, really. I hadn't seen eyes, only the idea of them. But in the dark your brain draws the rest. It gives a mouth the wrong curve, or imagines teeth that weren't there. That's part of the problem. You fill blanks with things you don't want. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because saying it out loud felt like asking that face to show up again. And because there weren't answers to the questions people like to ask. Who was he? What did he want? Did he follow you? Did you call the police? No, I don't know and no. A man in torn clothes living in a cabin no one wants to admit sits in the forest, doesn't leave a forwarding address. If I had called, what could I have offered? Trees, a direction, a middle-aged man with a blank look and nothing else. It's not that I didn't want help. It's that I wanted to carry the least amount of him with me as possible. I still think about the tallies on the wall. I don't know why that detail spends more time in my head than the face. Maybe because they were private. He hadn't done them for anyone but himself, however long he'd been there. 5 and a slash, 5 and a slash, as if by counting he was making something stay in place. Maybe days alone. Maybe people who had walked by. Maybe something small he killed and ate because the cabin had no food I could see. I don't pretend to know. Sometimes, when I'm in bed and the house makes ordinary house noises, I remember the way his eyes didn't move when I said sorry. It's such a human reflex to give back anything you're given, a word, a nod, a blink. He hadn't. It makes me think the expression I read as blank wasn't empty. It was full of something I didn't understand. I haven't gone back to that forest. If I told you that choice came from reason, I'd be lying. It comes from that picture of the tent door, and what I might have seen if I'd woken 2 minutes later. I don't want to do the math. I don't want to know whether his plan was to watch until I rolled onto my side and my breathing deepened, or whether he was deciding. People like to make monsters into cartoons after the fact. Fangs, claws, a way of walking that tells you what they are. I think the truth is more ordinary, and that's what makes it worse. A man who lives where he wants to live and takes what he thinks he can take and doesn't say anything unless he has to. If there's a lesson here, it's not something profound. It's not never hike alone, because people go alone all the time and come home. It's not always stay on the main trail, because I've been off trail before and nothing happened. The closest thing to a lesson is probably this: Pay attention to the small things. The way a path thins. The way a building sits where it shouldn't. The way a face can be nothing and everything at the same time. That's the kind of detail that can keep you alive, even if all it does is move your feet when they want to freeze. I can't tell you what he was about to do. Maybe nothing. Maybe exactly what I'm afraid of. All I can tell you for sure is what I saw through that opening, and how fast he ran when I moved, and how the forest swallowed the sound the same way it swallows everything, sooner or later. And I can tell you one more thing I didn't see at the time, but that came back to me later, like a flicker you notice only after a light goes out. The zipper tab on my tent was in a different place when I woke up than when I fell asleep. I remember because I always pinch it to the left, a habit, a small ritual, and when I grabbed for it in the dark it was centered. That's the image that sits with me now more than the face. Not the man, but the little metal pull, moved half an inch by a hand that wasn't mine. A tiny change in a small thing that says everything. Maybe he was testing the teeth. Maybe he wanted to see how quietly it would go. Maybe he just needed to feel the track under his fingers to be sure it was there. When I lock my front door at night now, I notice the weight of the deadbolt more than I used to. I feel the small clunk it makes when it settles. It's just metal in a slot, not a shield. But it's something. And I think about that zipper, and about how thin nylon is, and about how much of our sense of safety is a story we tell ourselves. Then I turn off the light and lie down, and when my eyes open in the dark for no reason, I listen, and I watch the doorway of my own room until it fades back into the house, until all it is again is a rectangle of darker dark. And I breathe, and I wait for the morning, and it comes. It always has so far. A year ago, in the middle of summer, I decided to take a small vacation for myself. I was visiting my parents for a few days, and the plan afterward was simple. Pack my gear, hike out to the river I used to love as a teenager, spend a night or two by myself, then head home. Nothing complicated. I don't live in the most adventurous state, and I don't get many chances to escape into the woods, so when I'm back in my parents' town I take advantage of every opportunity. The trail to the river wasn't scenic or popular. In fact, most people didn't even know it existed. It was basically just a thin dirt path that cut through some woods, flat enough that I didn't need a map. 4 hours of walking at a steady pace, and you reach the river. I liked it for one reason: nobody else ever used it. Most people went to the bigger trails that had trailheads, gravel parking lots, and signs warning about bears. This one had nothing. Just an empty pull-off on the road, and a thin line vanishing into the trees. That evening, when I finally got to the river, the sun had almost dropped. The air had that deep blue tint that comes before real night. I worked quickly, pitching my tent close to the bank, setting up my sleeping bag, then starting a small fire to cook dinner. It felt calm, the kind of quiet that makes you think about nothing at all. My whole body relaxed with the sound of water trickling over rocks, insects buzzing, and the flames popping softly. Then I heard footsteps. At first I thought it was just my mind doing what minds do in the woods, turning normal background sounds into something threatening. But the footsteps didn't fade. They got clearer, crunching over leaves, snapping the occasional twig. Someone was coming toward me. I turned, tense, my eyes searching the trees beyond the firelight. A man appeared. He stepped out from the tree line with a wave and a big smile. He looked maybe early 30s, tall, slim, with short brown hair. His clothes were dirty, not like someone who had just hiked in, but like someone who had been out here for a while. His jeans were scuffed, and his shirt was sweat-stained. There was an earthy smell clinging to him, strong enough that I noticed even with the smoke from my fire drifting around. "Hey there," he said, still smiling as he came closer. "Name's John. Mind if I sit for a bit?" I nodded, though I didn't really want to. It's hard to explain, but something felt wrong right away. Not because of anything he said, he was polite enough, but because of the timing. He had shown up within minutes of me starting my fire. That meant he had to have been close already. Close enough to hear me chopping sticks and striking a lighter. And yet he hadn't made himself known until the fire was burning bright. Still, I tried not to be rude. I offered him a seat on one of the logs near the fire. He sat down and started talking easily, like we were old friends. He asked how long I'd been camping, where I was from, what brought me out here. Then he told me he was staying not far from here, a bit upriver, and that he'd been living out here for a while. He didn't explain what a while meant. Weeks? Months? He never said. Something about him put me on edge. His words didn't match his eyes. He smiled constantly, but his eyes seemed to study me. Not just a casual glance, but heavy looks, lingering a second too long. It was like he wasn't paying attention to the conversation, just measuring me. I went along with it for maybe 20 minutes, nodding, laughing politely, but my brain was already telling me, something is wrong with this man. Eventually, he stood and said goodnight. He walked upriver, his flashlight beam bobbing between the trees. I watched him go, relieved. But then I noticed something that turned my relief into a new kind of fear. His flashlight went out after a minute. Just shut off. Why? If he really had a camp upriver, why would he turn it off before reaching it? Why would anyone walk through the dark woods without light, unless they didn't want to be seen? I sat there frozen for a long time, staring at the darkness where the light had vanished. Every noise from the woods, every rustle of leaves or crack of a stick, made me flinch. Eventually, I smothered the fire and retreated into my tent, though sleep didn't come easily. Every time I heard a sound outside, I imagined it was John, standing just out of sight. When the sun rose, I forced myself out of the tent. The river sparkled like nothing had happened. I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted, that John was just a weird but harmless guy. I spent the day hiking up and down the river, trying to enjoy the scenery. But one thing nagged me. I never saw another campsite. No tents, no fire pits, no signs of anyone living upriver where John claimed he was. By the time I got back to my tent that evening, the light was fading again. And that's when I saw him. John. He was sitting by my unlit fire pit, just sitting there like he'd been waiting for me. His smile was still there, wide and practiced. "Evening," he said. "Been waiting on you. I found something down the river I thought you'd want to see." I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Come on, I'll show you." He started walking toward the river without looking back. I stayed where I was. Every instinct screamed at me not to follow. "I think I'll just stay here," I said. My voice sounded too small, even to me. John stopped, turned slowly, and looked at me. His smile faltered. For the first time, I saw a crack in the act. His voice changed too, flatter, sharper. I said, "Come on. Just for a minute." We stared at each other for a long moment. His smile was gone now, replaced with something harder. And that's when I saw it. As he shifted, his shirt lifted slightly. Tucked into the waistband at his back was the outline of a gun. Not holstered, not carried safely. Just shoved down into his pants like he wanted it hidden. I went cold all over. Sure, plenty of people bring guns into the woods. But tucked like that? Concealed, uncomfortable, awkward? That wasn't for protection against bears. That was for hiding it from other people. I didn't answer. I didn't move. After a tense silence, John finally turned, muttering something under his breath, and walked back toward the river. His figure melted into the trees until I couldn't see him. I didn't waste time. My hands shook as I stuffed everything into my backpack, tent poles, sleeping bag, food, all of it in a jumble. I didn't care if things broke. I just wanted out. The trail back was 4.5 hours. I walked it in the dark, flashlight trembling in my hand, heart racing every time I heard a branch crack. At times, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but I never looked back. Looking back felt like inviting him to be there. When I finally reached my car, it was just after midnight. The relief of seeing it parked where I left it nearly brought me to tears. I drove home, knuckles white on the steering wheel, checking the rearview mirror every 2 minutes. 2 summers ago, me and one of my closest friends, let's call him Jesse, went on one of our annual camping trips. Back when we were roommates in college, we'd go all the time, but once we started full-time jobs, we could only swing it once or twice a year. Jesse was the one who actually got me into camping. I'd never even slept outside in a tent before meeting him. He grew up camping with his dad and brothers, so he knew what he was doing. I always leaned on his experience, and honestly, it made me feel safe. That summer, we both needed a break from work. Jesse suggested we just keep it simple. Find a trail, hike for about 2 hours, and then set up camp for 4 or 5 days. No crazy backpacking. Just relaxing. I liked the sound of that. When we reached the site we picked, we set up our tents side by side, gathered wood, built a fire pit, and stacked our supplies in one spot. The first 3 days were perfect. We drank beers by the fire, swapped stories, went for a couple short walks, played board games, and just enjoyed being out of cell range. That was the whole point, No noise from work, no obligations, no schedule. Just woods and quiet. By the fourth day, the trip felt like exactly what we needed. We agreed we'd pack up the next morning and head back. The sun was low in the sky, everything glowing orange and soft. I remember that golden light coming through the trees and thinking, this is what peace looks like. Jesse stood up and stretched. I'll grab some sticks for the fire, he said. You start pulling out the food. I nodded. It was routine by now. He'd go off, collect sticks, and I'd get the cooking stuff ready. I laid everything out, our pot, some instant rice, a couple packets of noodles, and the cooler with meat we'd kept packed with ice. I figured he'd be back in 10 or 15 minutes. But 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Then 50. I told myself he was just taking a walk. Jesse liked wandering more than I did. Still, as the sun dropped, the unease grew. I kept glancing toward the trees, waiting for him to come back with an armful of wood. Nothing. By the time it hit an hour, I started pacing. I told myself he was experienced. He'd been camping his whole life. He wouldn't get lost. Not Jesse. But an hour and a half in, I was worried. It was nearly dark, and the woods around our site were already thick with shadows. I turned on our heavy camping lamp, but I knew I couldn't keep it running all night. It would drain the batteries. I figured the best thing I could do was start the fire. That way, if Jesse was lost, he might see it and find his way back. I gathered sticks myself and lit the fire. The flames crackled high, pushing the darkness back just a little. I sat there, eyes darting toward every noise in the woods. The forest at night is cruel that way. Every rustle could be a rabbit or something worse, and you can't tell which. 2 hours since he left, and still no sign of him. I was losing it. I kept going over scenarios in my head. What if he tripped and broke an ankle? What if he ran into a bear? What if he was just messing with me? I couldn't decide whether to go looking or to stay put. If he was close, leaving camp would only make things worse. Then, 2.5 hours in, it happened. A gunshot cracked through the forest. I froze. The sound was distant but sharp, in the exact direction Jesse had walked. My stomach dropped. Neither of us had brought a gun. I knew that for a fact. I stood up, pacing in circles around the fire. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Who had fired? Was Jesse hurt? Was he with someone else? 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Not slow footsteps either. Running. Fast. They pounded against the ground, crunching leaves and snapping branches. I grabbed the lamp and swung it toward the sound. A figure burst into the light. It was Jesse. His eyes were wide, his face pale in the glow of the lamp. He looked more terrified than I'd ever seen anyone look. His chest heaved as he gasped for air. "We need to go," he hissed, voice sharp and panicked. "Right now." What happened?" I stammered. "No time," he snapped. "Pack your shit. We're leaving." His urgency hit me like a punch. He wasn't just spooked, he was in full survival mode. I didn't argue. I stuffed my things into my backpack in a frenzy. Jesse did the same, throwing his gear together with shaking hands. We left everything else behind, the cooler, the food, the firewood, even our chairs. We only took what we could carry. We hiked fast, Jesse pushing us to move quicker than I thought possible in the dark. I kept waiting to hear footsteps behind us, voices, anything. But there was only our own frantic breathing and the crunch of our boots on the dirt. After maybe half an hour of this, I finally couldn't hold back. "Jesse," I said, panting. "What happened? Who fired that gun?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "Someone was out there," he muttered. "He had a gun. He made me follow him." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean, follow him?" Jesse didn't answer right away. His face was locked in a grim expression. After a few moments, he said, he pointed the gun at me. Told me to shut up and walk. The words hit me like ice water. "Where was he taking you?" Jesse clenched his jaw. "Didn't stick around to find out." That was all he said. Nothing more. We made it back to the car hours later, just before sunrise, and drove home in silence. To this day, Jesse won't tell me exactly what happened out there. Every time I bring it up, he shuts down. He refuses to talk about the details, won't say what the man looked like, how he approached him, what words he used, or how Jesse got away. He doesn't even acknowledge the gunshot. When I ask, he just stares at me, stone-faced, and changes the subject. 5 years ago, I set out on what I thought was going to be a simple 3-day hike through a stretch of the northern Appalachians. I had done plenty of trails in that range before. Nothing about this trip seemed unusual, at least not when I first planned it. The trail started off as most do, well-worn, dirt packed under the boots of other hikers who'd passed through. I walked the first day at a steady pace, checking my compass and map every hour. The air was cool and damp, the kind of forest air that smells heavy with pine sap and old leaves. I was calm, confident, almost cocky. But by the second day, the path started thinning out. What had once been clearly marked ground began to fade into roots and rocks and brush. After another hour, I started to get that feeling, the one where your stomach knots because you know something isn't right. I stopped, checked my compass, cross-referenced with the notes I'd written down when researching the route. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't on the trail anymore. I was 90% sure I had wandered onto some old logging cut, one not even marked on the maps. The line I had been following didn't exist. At first, I wasn't worried. I'd done hikes where I'd lost the trail before, and I knew the basic rules. Don't panic, use your compass, retrace your steps if possible. But as the light started to fade, unease grew into something sharper. The forest was getting darker, the shadows heavier. And the more I walked, the less confident I was about where I'd been. Finally, I admitted I was stuck for the night. I pitched my tent quickly, half-assed, honestly, on a flat patch of ground, zipped myself inside, and tried to sleep. But sleep never came. I woke around 2 a.m. needing to piss. When I unzipped the tent, the night air hit me cold, damp, thick with silence. I stepped into the trees, flashlight in hand. That's when I noticed it. A glow in the distance. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but when I blinked, it was still there. An orange, flickering light. Firelight. My brain tried to reason it out. Maybe I wasn't the only one who'd wandered off trail. Maybe someone else had a camp out here. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. But the time of night, that's what threw me. 2 a.m. is when campers are passed out in their tents, not stoking fires. Why would anyone be sitting awake in the dark with a roaring fire? I felt a wave of dread, like icy water running down my spine. But the not knowing was worse. I couldn't go back in the tent and sleep, not while imagining someone sitting 100 yards away staring at the flames. So I did something stupid. I lit a fire of my own. I wanted them to see me, to know I was awake. My thinking was, if they were just normal campers, they'd see my fire and maybe come over, or at least call out. If they weren't normal campers, then at least they'd know I wasn't asleep. I stacked up kindling, struck a match, and coaxed a flame to life. It flared, caught, spread until I had a healthy glow. And then across the woods, their fire went out. Not slowly, not fading, just gone, like someone had dumped water over it the second they noticed mine. My face went numb. My throat closed up. There was no way in hell that was a coincidence. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat there rigid, staring into the dark until my eyes burned. Every sound, the snapping of branches, the flutter of wings, felt deliberate, like someone was out there circling, watching me. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat awake, the fire burning low, waiting for something to happen. At dawn, I packed everything, stuffed it into my bag, and prepared to find the real trail. But as I turned, I thought about the glow again. Curiosity clawed at me. What if it really was just another camper? What if they could point me back? I told myself I'd just check. Just a quick look. I walked in the direction of the glow. The forest was heavy and damp, my boots squelching in moss. And then I found it, the remains of a fire pit, black and ashy, still damp from being smothered. And around it, prints. Dozens of them. Not boot prints, not hiking shoes. Bare feet. Large, calloused, some cracked and bloody. They circled the fire like a dance. My stomach turned. But worse was what I found 10 yards away. A hut, or maybe a cabin. Ramshackle, built from mismatched wood. The door was wide open. Against every instinct, I went closer. The smell hit first. Rot. Mold. Old piss. Inside, it was a hoarder's nightmare. Piles of gear everywhere. Hiking sticks, backpacks, tents. Some new, some so old they were falling apart. I recognized brands I knew cost good money. Osprey packs, Thermarests, expensive boots. None of it matched. None of it looked like it belonged to one person. It looked like collections. And then I saw the other things. Sleeping bags slashed open. Knives with rust-brown stains. A child's shoe tiny, caked with mud. And hanging from the wall, ropes, tied into loops, knotted and stiff. The air was suffocating inside that hut. It pressed against my chest, heavy, like the whole place was alive and breathing. I backed out, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Somehow, I found my way back. I don't even remember walking, just stumbling, clutching my bag, half sobbing into the trees. Hours later, by pure luck, I spotted a boulder I remembered passing on the way in. From there, I managed to reconnect with the actual trail and bolted out of the mountains. When I finally had service, I called the police. I told them everything, the fire, the prints, the hut. They said they'd look into it. When I was a kid, my family had this tradition of taking a big summer camping trip. We lived in Arizona. So the yearly escape into Washington was like stepping into another world, green forests, cold lakes, air that smelled like rain and pine needles. It was heaven to me. The best part wasn't the scenery, though. It was seeing my cousins. We only saw each other once or twice a year, but whenever we did, it was like no time had passed. My closest cousin was Luis. He was a year older than me, and we were inseparable. He felt more like a brother than anything else. This particular trip started like all the others. My parents and aunts and uncles set up a big communal campsite near the lake. They lined up the tents in a semicircle, strung tarps between trees, got the fire pit going. All the grown-ups sat around drinking beer, laughing, grilling hot dogs. The other kids splashed in the lake, throwing mud at each other, swimming out to the log that had drifted near shore. Luis didn't like swimming much, so he and I usually disappeared into the woods. That year, we invented our own version of tag called Bandit. One of us was the outlaw, the other the sheriff, and we'd chase each other until somebody got caught. Luis had a knack for dramatic falls, flopping into the leaves and pretending I'd shot him, rolling his eyes back like he was dead. I'd collapse laughing every time. On the second day of the trip, after lunch, we played Bandit in the woods behind the campsite. The rules were simple. Don't go too far, stay where we could hear the grown-ups shouting if they called us. But kids don't follow rules very well. I got carried away running from Luis. My legs pumped harder than my brain was thinking. He picked up a stick as long as his arm, waving it like a rifle, yelling, "I got you," and chasing me through the trees. My heart raced, the world blurred, and I ran deeper than I realized. When I finally stopped, panting, I found myself staring at something strange. A trailer. It sat crooked in a small clearing, paint peeling, windows fogged with grime. The metal sides were streaked with rust, and weeds grew up around the wheels. It looked abandoned. Forgotten. Luis caught up, dropping the stick when he saw where I was looking. "Whoa," he whispered. "What is that?" We stood there frozen, like the air itself dared us to move. Something about it felt wrong. Abandoned things in the woods always do. They look out of place, like they shouldn't exist, and your brain starts asking questions you don't want answers to. Who brought it here? Why did they leave it? Was it really abandoned, or was someone inside right now watching? "Let's check it out," Luis said, trying to sound brave. I hesitated. What if somebody lives there? He shrugged. Doesn't look like anybody's lived there in forever. We crept closer, sticks snapping under our shoes. The closer we got, the stronger the smell hit us. A sour, metallic stench, like wet metal and something rotten. One of the windows was covered with plywood nailed crudely across it. Another had glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern. We didn't go in. Even as kids, some part of us knew better. We circled once, then backed away, both pretending we weren't as unsettled as we really were. We started walking back toward camp, though neither of us was sure which way that was anymore. 10 minutes later, as we wandered, we saw movement ahead. A man and a woman. They came into view pushing a shopping cart. Yes, a shopping cart, out here in the middle of the woods, squeaking over roots and rocks. It was full of junk. Rusted pans, tangled wires, dented pots. Nothing clean, nothing in bags, just piles of scrap like they'd raided dumpsters. The woman noticed us first. She was maybe in her late 30s, with stringy blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She smiled wide, too wide, and came toward us like she'd been expecting us. "Well, hey there," she said brightly. "What are you two doing out here all by yourselves?" Luis and I froze. She crouched down a little to be at our height. Her eyes scanned us, flicking quickly between our faces, our clothes, our hands. The man stayed behind the cart, silent. He was tall, gaunt, with greasy black hair and a beard that looked like it had never been trimmed. His eyes locked on me with a stare so flat and empty it made my skin crawl. We were just playing," Luis stammered. The woman's smile widened. "You're both such sweet boys. What are your names? How old are you?" I don't know why we told her, but we did. Kids are trusting like that. When I said my age, I swear her face shifted for just a second. She glanced at the man, who still hadn't said a word, then back at us. "You don't need to be scared," she said. "We'll help you find your way back. Why don't you come with us? We were just heading to our camp. We can make some s'mores. Doesn't that sound fun?" Her tone was sugary sweet, but her grip when she suddenly took my hand was iron. My small hand disappeared in hers, clammy and strong. She grabbed Luis's too, tugging us gently but firmly in the direction they were walking. My stomach twisted. The cart squeaked ahead of us, the man's boots crunching slow and steady. Luis looked at me. I could see in his eyes he was scared, but neither of us said anything. Something about her voice, about his stare, kept us locked in silence. We walked like that for a few minutes, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then, faintly, I heard it. Our names. Someone calling. "Luis. Hey, where are you guys?" It was my sister's voice. The woman froze mid-step. Her grip tightened on my hand until it hurt. She looked over her shoulder at the man. For the first time, he spoke. His voice was low, gruff, almost a growl. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone made my knees weak. The woman pulled us faster, turning us back toward the trailer. "Come on, honey," she cooed. "Let's hurry." Panic flooded me. I opened my mouth and screamed my sister's name. The woman's smile cracked. Her face twisted in an instant from sweetness to anger, her teeth clenched. She let go of my hand, like it was burning her. Luis ripped free too, and we bolted. My sister came crashing through the trees, eyes wide with relief. Behind her, my parents and some of the other adults called out. Within seconds, we were surrounded by family safe. The couple changed instantly. The woman laughed nervously, hands up like she had nothing to hide. "Oh, we found these two wandering," she said. "We were just about to help them back to camp. Such sweet boys." The man finally smiled, but it was thin and wrong, his teeth yellow and crooked. My parents thanked them. Actually thanked them. Invited them to stop by the camp later for food. The couple declined, saying they had to get back. And then they pushed the cart away, squeaking into the woods. For years, Luis and I didn't really talk about what happened. We both knew it was strange, but our parents brushed it off. To them, the couple had just been some eccentric campers. It wasn't until we were teenagers that Luis and I sat down and really thought about it. The hand grip, the forced smiles, the cart full of junk, the way the man never said a word until the last second, the way the woman tightened her hold when she heard our names being called. We realized what could have happened. Luis admitted that, even at the time, he thought they were planning to take us. To sell us. To do something unspeakable. 18 years later, I still remember that man's stare. Blank, predatory. Like we weren't kids at all, we were meat. Back in college, I wasn't what you'd call an outdoors guy. I'd been on hikes, sure, but camping overnight in the woods? That was new territory for me. My friend Andrew, though we'll call him that, was all about it. We hadn't known each other for more than a year, but we clicked fast. He was outgoing, funny, a little cocky, and always looking for something different to do. One night during spring semester, we were hanging out in the dorms talking about plans for break, and he suggested we go camping. Not just a quick day hike, but a full-on overnight trip. He said he knew a trail he'd been on before, quiet, secluded, not the type of place frat bros or families went. "It'll just be us, man. No interruptions. Pure forest." I agreed. I trusted him, and it sounded like a good way to kill a couple of days. When spring break rolled around, we packed light, tents, food, a couple sleeping bags, some beers, and fire-starting supplies. Nothing fancy. Neither of us had much money anyway. We drove out to the trailhead mid-afternoon, parked, and started walking. The hike itself was long but not hard. The trail cut deep into the woods, quiet enough that we barely saw another person. The further we went, the more isolated it felt. 6 miles in, the air was damp, cool, thick with the smell of earth. Birds chirped, twigs snapped under our boots, and that was it. No roads, no houses, no sign of anyone else. It was perfect. We reached a clearing where Andrew said he'd camped before. It was flat, shaded, with enough space to set up both tents side by side. The sun was just dipping low when we got everything up. By the time it was dark, we had a decent little fire going. That night was fun. We cracked open beers, talked about classes, girls, music, typical college stuff. I remember thinking this was exactly how it should feel. Isolated but safe, free from deadlines and noise. We laughed loud enough to scare off any wildlife in a mile radius. Eventually, though, we were tired. We doused the fire, crawled into our tents, and called it a night. I fell asleep quickly. The forest was quiet in that almost hypnotic way, leaves rustling softly, wind humming in the trees. But I kept waking up. Not from noises, not at first. Just sudden jolts, like my body knew something wasn't right. 3 times I opened my eyes to the black inside of my tent, sat up, listened, and told myself I was just being jumpy. I'd never camped overnight before, so maybe it was just nerves. The 4th time I woke, though, there was a sound. A soft, steady zip. Andrew's tent. I froze, ears straining. The zipper slid down. Then I heard him step out, just a couple of footsteps crunching leaves. Then nothing. I figured he was going to take a piss. But then came another sound, rustling. Like he was going through his backpack. It went on longer than it should have. 30 seconds. A full minute. Then silence. I sat there in the dark, every muscle tight, waiting. The quiet stretched out, heavy, unnatural. Finally, I couldn't take it. I reached for my own zipper, pulling it down slowly. The second it started, I heard it. Footsteps rushing. Fast. Direct. Straight toward my tent. My heart leapt. I froze, hands still on the zipper, staring at the thin nylon wall between me and whatever was outside. And then the footsteps stopped. I yanked the flap open and shoved my head out. My flashlight beam cut through the dark. Andrew was crouched just a few feet away, shoving something into his pack. When the light hit him, he snapped his head up. His face was pale, his eyes wide, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaky. He stared at me for a second, too long, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. His tone was flat, unconvincing. I climbed out, still holding the flashlight. "What are you doing?" He zipped his bag shut quickly, stood up, and forced a weak smile. "Couldn't sleep. Just getting some air." But as he talked, my eyes drifted down. Sticking out of the top of his backpack was the handle of a handgun. I froze. My stomach dropped. Andrew saw me see it. His face changed instantly, smile gone, jaw tight. We locked eyes for a few long, awful seconds. I wanted to say something. Ask him why he had it, why he didn't tell me, what he planned on doing with it. But the words caught in my throat. My brain screamed gun, gun, gun on repeat. Finally, without another word, he turned, slid back into his tent, and zipped it shut. I stood there in the dark, trembling. My flashlight beam shook with my hand. I sat back down on the ground outside, heart racing, and stayed there the rest of the night. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, not knowing he was a few feet away, armed, acting like that. Every sound of him shifting in his tent made my nerves jolt. When the sun finally rose, I didn't waste time. I packed my gear as quietly as I could, not even bothering with breakfast. Andrew emerged groggily, watching me. Neither of us spoke. By the time I had my stuff strapped up, I muttered something about leaving early. He just nodded, face unreadable. That was the last time we spoke. He never texted me after that. Never explained why he had a gun, or why he was acting so strangely that night. It was like he wanted to erase the whole thing. I've thought about it too many times since then. Why bring a gun and hide it from me? Why sneak around the tents in the middle of the night? Why crouch like he was waiting for me to catch him? The worst part is knowing that I don't know. My brain fills in the blanks in ways that make my skin crawl. Maybe he brought it for protection and was just being weird. Maybe he was drunk and paranoid. Or maybe he was planning something else entirely. I'm 29, and I've been camping and backpacking for years. Living in lower West Virginia, right on the edge of the Appalachian Range, it's almost impossible not to. The mountains are right there, their ridges always on the horizon, daring you to come closer. My best friend used to be my main partner for those trips. We'd pick a week every fall, map out a route, and spend days moving from one camp to the next, carrying everything on our backs. It wasn't just hiking, it was unplugging completely. In 2019, we had one of those big trips planned. The route was ambitious, several days of trekking, ending at a lake tucked high in the mountains. But a few days before we were set to leave, my friend called me. Work emergency. He couldn't go. I'd already taken the week off. My gear was packed, my mind was set. I figured, what the hell, I'd go alone. I wasn't new to this, and part of me thought it would be a challenge. Just me and the mountains. Monday morning, I drove to the trailhead. Unlike the popular 4-hour day hikes, this wasn't a path with trail markers and steady traffic. These backpacking routes required navigation by compass, map, and landmarks. You pick a distant point, a ridge, a rock formation, a break in the tree line, and you move toward it. When you get there, you find the next landmark. That's how you keep yourself oriented. The first 2 days were smooth. Hard miles, but nothing I couldn't handle. I kept a good pace, the crunch of my boots steady on damp ground, the smell of wet leaves and moss everywhere. Each night I set up my tent, cooked a simple meal, and read until I passed out. On the second night, though, things changed. I had stopped hours short of the ridge I was aiming for, deciding to camp in a small clearing just off a stream. It was already dark when I crawled into my tent, the fire flickering low outside. I pulled out a paperback, read by flashlight, and let the steady crackle of the fire lull me. Then, clear as day, I heard it. Snap. A stick breaking, directly behind my tent. I jolted upright. At first I thought, bear. That's always the fear in these woods. But when I listened closer, nothing followed. No padding of heavy paws, no snuffling. Just silence. Still, the sound had been too sharp to ignore. It wasn't the random cracking of a branch under its own weight. It was a footstep. I unzipped the tent, flashlight in hand, and swept the beam into the trees. Nothing but black trunks and brush. I shouted, loud and firm, hoping to scare off anything that might be lingering. The words bounced back at me through the silence. No answer. After 10 minutes of scanning and listening, I put out the fire and crawled back into the tent. Sleep didn't come easy. Every little rustle outside made my skin crawl. I think I dozed for an hour here and there, but mostly I just lay there listening, straining for footsteps. Morning felt like a relief. I packed fast, barely ate, and set off toward the ridge. By mid-afternoon, I reached it. From there, it was supposed to be a straight shot to the lake. I moved quickly, wanting to reach the water before dark. When I arrived, the sight was breathtaking, blue water glinting under the last orange streaks of sunset, ringed by pine trees. It should have felt like a reward, but my nerves from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, being at that remote lake, knowing I was the only person around for miles, made it worse. I walked the perimeter just to check. No other tents. No smoke. No sign of anyone. I set up my own tent on the tree line, lit a fire, and tried to enjoy it. But the noises started again. Soft, deliberate crunches. Not constant, not close, but enough to keep my head snapping around every few minutes. Footsteps. I told myself I was paranoid. Maybe it was just small animals. Maybe I was spooking myself because I'd spent the last night on edge. But the sound was too steady, too human. When it grew too dark to see past the firelight, I got in my tent and zipped it up. Every few minutes, I swore I heard movement circling the campsite. The faint crunch of leaves. The creak of branches. Sometimes it was behind me, sometimes to the side. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted off, nerves frayed. What woke me wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of running. Heavy, fast, crashing through leaves, sprinting away from my tent. I bolted upright, heart hammering. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap in a frenzy. The beam cut across the clearing, just in time to catch a figure disappearing into the trees. All I saw was a bare back, pale against the dark. A man, running full tilt into the forest. I spun, light shaking, breath sharp. And that's when I saw them. Footprints. All around my tent. Deep impressions in the soil, circling, weaving like whoever it was had been walking around and around while I slept. My stomach turned to stone. I threw wood on the fire until it roared. I sat beside it all night, eyes darting, ears straining. Every crack in the forest made me flinch. When dawn broke, I made a decision. I wasn't staying. I snapped a couple photos of the lake almost out of spite. I'd worked hard to get there, but I packed fast and started back. The hike out was grueling, not because of the terrain, but because of the feeling. I couldn't shake it, the sense that I wasn't alone. Every so often, I swore I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, measured, always just far enough away that when I stopped to listen, the woods went dead quiet. Hours later, I stumbled back onto a familiar trail marker. Relief surged through me. I knew where I was again. From there, it was a straight shot back to my car. But the relief didn't last. Somewhere along the hike back, I started noticing small things missing from my pack. A food packet. A multi-tool. Later, a lighter. At first, I thought I'd dropped them. But then I remembered the footprints. The way they circled my tent, close enough to touch it. The realization hit me so hard I stopped in my tracks. Whoever had been outside my tent that night hadn't just walked around me. They'd gone into my bag. They'd unzipped it, silently, while I slept. And they'd taken things. The thought made me shiver so violently I had to sit down. Someone had been inches from me, reaching into my things. maybe leaning over me, maybe watching my chest rise and fall as I breathed. I forced myself up and didn't stop again until I saw my car. I threw everything inside, locked the doors, and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my breathing slowed. My family owns a cluster of cabins in Oregon. They aren't luxury rentals or anything like that, just old wooden cabins tucked deep in the forest, handed down over generations. They've always been places where we hold family get-togethers, summer reunions, or just quick weekend trips when someone wanted to escape. By the time I turned 20, I had grown up seeing those cabins my whole life. That year, I decided I wanted to camp near them on my own. Not in the cabins themselves, something about roughing it outside, alone, made the idea more exciting. And if anything went wrong, I'd be close enough to the cabins for backup. It seemed like the perfect compromise between safety and adventure. I packed light. Just a tent, sleeping bag, some food, and a few essentials. It was early summer, warm during the day but still cool at night. I drove out in the morning, parked near the main trail, and hiked about 30 minutes down into the trees. The path dipped low into a hill, and at the bottom, one of the old family cabins sat crooked in a small clearing. The first thing I noticed was the window. It wasn't broken, it was gone. The entire frame had been pulled out, leaving a gaping square of darkness. I slowed, heart thumping. No shards on the ground. No clean edges. It looked like someone had literally pried the whole thing out and taken it. I had the key to the cabin. My parents always gave me one in case of emergencies. Something about the missing window felt wrong, like maybe I needed to check it out. But when I reached the door, it wasn't locked. It swung open with a creak. Inside, the smell hit me first. Damp wood, mold, stale air. But layered on top of that was something sharper. Sweat, dirt, the faint metallic tang of rust. The place was a mess. Furniture tipped over, drawers yanked open, muddy footprints smeared across the floorboards. A lamp was missing. The small TV was gone. Even some of the kitchen supplies, knives, pots, pans, had vanished. The realization crept in slowly. This cabin had been broken into. And not recently. Judging by the mud stains and the thick dust, people had been in and out for a while. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't linger. I pulled the door shut, did my best to wedge it closed, and headed further down the hill to find a camping spot. The sun was already lowering, and rain clouds had started building. By the time I got my tent up, fat drops of rain splattered the nylon. Within an hour, it was pouring. I sat under a tree eating packaged food, trying to convince myself the weirdness at the cabin didn't matter. Break-ins happen. Maybe it had been months ago. Maybe whoever did it was long gone. That's when I heard it. A voice. Not yelling, not talking to someone. Mumbling. Rambling. I spun around, and there he was. A man trudging up the hill in the rain, soaked through, head bent, muttering to himself. His clothes were filthy, hanging off him in damp folds. His hair was matted, his beard unkempt. He didn't even glance at me, just walked uphill toward the cabin. I held perfectly still, barely breathing. The sound of his voice carried back to me, nonsense phrases. Yeah, no, that's fine. Over and over. He disappeared into the trees, and I sat frozen, pulse racing. For a long time, I debated what to do. Should I pack up? Should I move? But it was pouring rain, the ground already mud. I told myself maybe he was just some drifter taking shelter. Maybe he wouldn't even notice me. But deep down, my gut screamed otherwise. Night fell fast, black clouds blotting out the moon. I lit a small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and sat close to it, staring into the flames. That's when I heard the footsteps. Up the hill. Slow. Careful. I turned, and in the edge of the firelight, a figure emerged. It was him. The same man from before, dripping wet, face blank, staring at me like I was the only thing in the world. What do you want? I yelled, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. Didn't blink. He just stood there, 10 feet away, watching. The silence stretched, unbearable. Then he turned his head slightly, listening. And that's when I heard it. Another footstep. Behind me. The blood drained from my face. I whipped around, but the firelight didn't reach far enough into the trees. Another figure moved at the edge of the dark, too quick to see clearly. Panic exploded in me. I didn't think, I just ran. I bolted sideways down the hill, sliding in mud, crashing through brush. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I reached the top of another rise where the forest thinned. I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving. I couldn't hear them over the rain. I didn't know if they chased me. It took me hours, stumbling, slipping, using only my phone light, to make it back to where I'd parked. When I finally saw my car, I almost collapsed again, fumbling with my keys, tearing inside, locking the doors. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The operator listened as I explained what happened. She told me to stay put, that a unit would be sent to investigate the cabin. I drove to the nearest gas station to wait. In the following days, the police confirmed what I already knew. The cabin had been broken into. But there was more. Inside, they found 3 different sets of muddy shoe prints. 3. Not one man. Not 2. 3. They told me it was likely a group squatting there, maybe using the place as a hideout. They said they probably weren't after me specifically, just desperate people stealing supplies. I've been camping on and off for years. I usually keep my trips short, 2, maybe 3 days at most. That way I can head out on a Friday, spend the weekend outside, and be back home by Sunday night without burning through vacation time. Most of the time it's uneventful, peaceful. That's why I go out there in the first place. But one trip last year reminded me that the woods are only peaceful if you're alone. It was a Saturday morning in late spring. The sky was clear, the weather mild. I'd heard of a new 4-mile trail out in the sticks, about 2 hours from home. It wasn't a maintained campground, more of a forgotten trail that hunters sometimes used. That appealed to me. I packed light. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, stove. The basics. By the time I parked and started walking, the sun was already climbing. The forest was damp, the trail narrow and muddy in places, roots sticking up like bones. About 45 minutes in, I saw something strange. Off to the side of the trail stood a tent. It sagged inward, one pole bent, nylon faded and patched with mildew. The fabric was ripped in several places, weathered by rain and sun. I slowed, staring. From a distance, it looked abandoned. No movement. No gear outside. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, peered through the flap. Empty. No clothes, no sleeping bag, no stove. Not even trash. Just the hollow, moldy shell of what had once been someone's shelter. Something about that struck me. People don't just leave tents behind. Gear is expensive. If you're packing up and leaving, you take it. Even if it's damaged, you strip it down and salvage what you can. Leaving it meant something had gone wrong. I walked back to the trail, unsettled but trying not to think about it too much. Maybe the person ditched it and bought new gear. Maybe they were careless. But then, over the next 2 miles, I started noticing other things. First, a rusted camp stove lying in the dirt. Then a hiking boot, its laces missing, chewed at the edges. A little farther on, a torn backpack strap. A cooking pot. A half-crushed water bottle. Scattered along the trail like breadcrumbs. Not clustered together, not dropped in one place. Spread out. By the time I reached the end of the trail, my stomach was knotted. I had seen at least a dozen abandoned items, all of them weathered, all of them things no sane hiker would leave behind. It didn't feel accidental. It felt deliberate. Still, I pushed the unease down and set up my own camp. I picked a spot off the trail, tucked between thick trees, ground flat enough for my tent. The sun was dropping by then, orange light slanting through the forest. I built a small fire, cooked a meal, tried to settle my nerves. By midnight, I'd actually managed to fall asleep. When I woke, the world was gray with pre-dawn light. Birds hadn't even started singing yet. I unzipped my tent, stretched, and stepped outside. That's when I froze. On the other side of my tent, less than 6 feet away, stood a man. Tall. Thin. Clothes filthy, torn, caked with mud. His hair hung in greasy mats around his face. His skin was stained, his eyes sunken. He smelled like a mixture of rot, piss, and sweat, so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat. He just stood there, staring. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My mind refused to believe he was real. Then he spoke. Leave. His voice was soft, but it crawled across my skin. I stammered, okay, and crouched to grab my backpack. Before I could stand, he lunged. Not to strike, but to loom. He bent over me so close I could feel the heat of his breath. His eyes were empty, his lips cracked and wet. Leave, he whispered again. His smell was overwhelming. Sour, human filth. The odor of someone who hadn't washed in months, layered with something else, something metallic like rust or dried blood. His clothes hung open at the waist, zipper broken, the outline of his pelvis visible under the fabric. I caught myself wondering, horribly, if that was intentional. I tried to back away, muttering okay, over and over. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might faint. He just stared, expression flat, lips twitching like he wanted to say more but couldn't. Finally, I shoved past him, grabbed my bag, and started walking fast. My tent and sleeping bag were still there, but I didn't care. I had my phone and my car keys in my pocket. That was enough. Behind me, I heard him drop to his knees in the dirt. The sound of fabric tearing. Then a low muttering, words I couldn't make out, choked and uneven, like he was talking to himself or to someone who wasn't there. I didn't turn back. I walked as fast as I could, then jogged, then sprinted until my legs burned. Every shadow looked like him. Every tree felt like it was hiding a figure waiting to lunge. By the time I reached my car, I was soaked in sweat, lungs screaming. I slammed the doors shut, locked them, and just sat there shaking, staring at the trailhead. I called 911. The operator kept her voice calm as I explained everything. A few days later, an officer called me back. They'd gone out to search the trail. They found my abandoned gear scattered in pieces near the spot I'd camped. Torn, shredded, like it had been ripped apart for fun. They also found signs of multiple old camps, fire pits, crude shelters, piles of junk. Not just one man. And the most unsettling detail, another report, nearly identical to mine, had been filed months earlier. That person had also seen a filthy man in the woods. That person had also been told, in that same quiet voice, to leave. But that earlier report was never released to the public. The victim requested it stay sealed. To this day, the case is inactive. No suspects. No arrests. I like to take small camping trips throughout the year. Nothing huge, just 2 or 3 day hikes that I can squeeze in over a weekend without messing up my work schedule. For me, camping is about being alone, getting away from people, and hearing nothing but the wind in the trees and water lapping at a shore. This particular trip happened in mid-April. I had found a spot on a topographic map, a small, hidden lake about a 5-hour hike from the nearest access point. No official trails led directly to it. That was the appeal. If there wasn't a marked trail, there'd be no crowds. Probably no one at all. That morning, I parked my car on the gravel shoulder at the forest entrance, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The air was cool, the trees dripping from recent rain. A faint mist hung low over the undergrowth, and the deeper I walked, the quieter it became. I settled into a rhythm, boots crunching over damp leaves, birds calling faintly, and the occasional snap of branches under my weight. The hike was straightforward. I had mapped it out well. 5 hours across mostly flat terrain, just a gradual incline toward the end. Nothing I couldn't handle. About 4 hours in, though, something made me pause. I'd been zoning out, focused on the rhythm of walking, when I caught movement in the distance. Something, or someone, slipped between the trees ahead of me. Just a quick blur. I froze. My ears strained. But the forest gave nothing back. I told myself it was a deer. Maybe a bear. But in that brief flash, I could have sworn I saw shoulders. Arms. A person. I forced myself to keep walking, but I was more alert now, eyes scanning every gap between trees. For the last stretch of the hike, the hair on my neck never settled. When I finally reached the lake, the tension in me cracked. It was beautiful. The water shimmered under a gray sky, smooth as glass. Pines crowded its edges, and a few ducks cut quiet ripples across its surface. I set up my tent in a grove just off the shoreline, hidden enough by the trees but still with a view of the water. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, quiet, remote, untouched. Almost immediately, though, I saw something that ruined it. Across the lake, on the opposite shore, someone was walking. A figure, slow and deliberate, moving just along the edge of the trees. No pack. No tent. No fishing gear. Just walking. I stood frozen, watching. They didn't glance my way. Didn't do anything threatening. They simply strolled along the treeline until they reached a bend, then stepped into the forest and disappeared. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. They never reappeared. The unease crept back. Who comes to a lake this remote with no gear? No reason. I scanned the shoreline again and again, but it stayed empty. I forced myself to go through the motions. I unpacked. I cooked a small meal on my camp stove. I lit a small fire as the light faded. I told myself I was overthinking it, but by nightfall, I couldn't shake the thought of that figure. I sat by the fire, book in hand, trying to distract myself. The flames crackled low, throwing light across the grove. That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. I looked up from the page and scanned the trees. Nothing. Still, I couldn't focus. Every sound felt amplified. Every rustle felt deliberate. I gave up on reading, packed my book away, and started preparing for bed. My nerves were tight, but the exhaustion of the hike weighed on me. I did one last sweep of the tree line before putting out the fire. And that's when I saw him. 15 yards away, between two trees, a figure stood. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing. Even in the dark, I could make out the shape of him. Broad shoulders. Long arms. A head tilted slightly like he was studying me. We locked eyes, or at least I felt we did. His face was shadowed, but the focus was undeniable. For a full minute, neither of us moved. Then slowly he stepped backward. Not turning, not breaking eye contact. Just walking backward until the dark swallowed him whole. My entire body trembled. I rebuilt the fire bigger, feeding it constantly, terrified of being left in the dark. My plan had been to sleep in my tent, but there was no chance of that now. I sat on a log, staring into the flames, jerking my head toward every sound. The night dragged on endlessly. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig made me flinch. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps circling. Sometimes I thought I saw movement at the edge of the firelight. But no one came closer. When dawn finally broke, my eyes felt raw from lack of sleep. I packed everything quickly, shoving gear into my bag with shaking hands. I wanted out. I followed the same route back, moving fast. The forest seemed too quiet. Halfway through the hike, I froze again. Behind me, faint but distinct, came footsteps. Not constant, not rushed. Just enough that every few minutes, I'd hear the crunch of leaves, timed with mine, then stop when I stopped. I forced myself not to look back. The thought of seeing him standing there, staring, was worse than not knowing. For hours, the feeling of being followed clung to me. Only when I broke through the last stretch and saw my car did I finally allow myself to glance back. The trail was empty. I tossed my gear in the car, climbed in, and locked the doors. I sat gripping the wheel, heart hammering, eyes on the tree-line. Nothing moved. I drove away, my stomach twisted into knots, headlights sweeping the forest one last time. I never saw him again after that.